I'm Z.
And I'm Jake.
And
welcome back to Hungry Talks.
Welcome back, Jake. Give us a big smile. There it is. You look much more like yourself today.
Yep, I'm feeling a lot better now.
So what happened?
I had a huge panic attack last week.
Oh, what was it about? Are you okay?
I was just chilling in my room and then suddenly it hit me.
What did?
I'm graduating soon.
Ah.
This is serious stuff. Am I ready? How do I land a job, make connections, navigate the real world?
It's totally normal to feel overwhelmed, but stressing won't help. We need to think positive and prepare ourselves.
Easier said than done, Z.
True. Well, I guess today's our lucky day. We've got 3 wonderful guests joining us to help figure it all out.
Wait, 3?
Yep, 3. First up, we have Amy Lee, the founder of Talent Run and a master of networking and mentorship in the advertising industry.
And next we've got Julia Gianni-McGoran, also known as GGMcG, a brilliant visual artist whose work spans album covers and major brand campaigns.
And finally, Tim Stroh, a tech innovator whose work has transformed how creative teams communicate and collaborate worldwide.
What a lineup.
Exactly. So, whether you're about to graduate, just starting out, looking to level up your career, or simply intrigued by the power of connections, aha, you're in the right place.
So without further ado, let's get
started. This week's Quick Brief is brought to you by the Australian Water Safety Council.
This one's tough. Bystander drownings are on the rise as parents try to rescue their children.
It's heartbreaking to see someone in danger, but it's crucial to stop, assess the situation, and think before acting.
Exactly. Too often the person attempting the rescue ends up drowning, while the person they're trying to save survives.
Imagine the guilt and heartbreak that could bring. We don't want anyone putting their life at unnecessary risk while trying to save someone else.
That's why it's so important to always bring a flotation device if you're attempting a rescue. It could make all the difference.
And that's your challenge this week. Create a public safety campaign that educates people on the importance of using a flotation device during rescues.
The target audience is parents, carers, and men visiting regional beaches during holiday times.
And since this is our final quick brief, you have complete freedom with the deliverable. Any media format you like.
Right, this is your final chance to show off your creative skills and win the Scam Champ Award.
So grab this opportunity. Check out our socials for all the details.
And send your quick brief entry to quickbriefs@hungrytalks.com.au for your shot at being crowned Scam Champ of this year.
Get creative and make an impact. Now, before we move on to our entree, let's take a look at one of the incredible projects Julia directed for Crocs.
Joining us for the entree today are Amy Lee and GGMcG. Welcome to the show.
We're so happy to have you both here. But before we dive into the deeper questions, let's start with something fun, some rapid fire questions. So what we'll do is we'll ask you a series of quick questions and you'll try to answer as many as you can within a minute. Ready?
All right, so we'll start with you, Amy, and Z's going to ask you a question, answer, and then I'll ask you a question, and then we'll go like that. So if you're ready to go, Z, do you want to kick it off?
Go.
Describe yourself in one word.
Fun.
What was your first job?
Working in advertising, I started at George Pat's on the CUB account.
Oh, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What's one thing you never leave home without?
My phone.
Best piece of career advice?
Be enthusiastic.
Are you still in contact with friends from kindergarten?
No.
Favorite thing about your job?
Meeting new people.
If you had a superpower, what would it be?
I'd love to fly.
Oh, which compass direction are you facing right now?
Which?
Yeah, which compass direction are you facing right now?
North.
Oh.
Your favourite ad?
I love the new work that's just come out on ABC iView.
Oh, favorite book?
Pass.
One word to describe the future of advertising.
We got quite a lot.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's go with Julia next.
All right, I'm ready.
Ready?
All right, let's go.
Go.
What's the first thing you do when you wake up?
Brush my teeth.
Early bird or night owl?
Night.
Describe yourself in one word.
Annoying.
Describe yourself in 2 words.
Annoyingly colourful.
Favorite city in the world?
Rome.
Who is your biggest inspiration?
Mr. Bean.
What colour best describes you?
Green.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be patient.
Which Harry Potter house would you be in?
I hate Harry Potter.
Describe your job in 3 words.
Very, very good.
Okay. Most fun artist you've worked with?
At the Wiggles.
Creating in silence or with music?
Real Housewives of New York City.
A hobby you picked up recently? A hobby you picked up recently?
Oh, shit. I mean, whoops. Hobby. Sculpey.
What's your secret talent?
I can take my glasses off with my feet that way.
Wow. Well, that's perfect.
All right.
You can take your glasses with
Yeah,
your...
not right now, don't I? I can.
Yeah, wow.
Well, that was fun. So we get to know a bit about you guys then. No.
All right, perfect. So Amy, you were with the Advertising Council Australia for nearly 7 years. And what inspired you to found Talent Run?
Yes, I was at Advertising Council Australia, and for any of our audience that don't know what Advertising Council Australia is, it's the peak industry body for advertising agencies. And I had the most amazing job, my dream job. I worked with all the Australian agencies, and I looked after industry initiatives and hosted events for the industry. And it was incredible. And what was happening in the role was that agency leaders were coming to me saying, do you know a good copywriter? Do you know a good account manager? Do you know a good traffic manager? And I realised that I was placing people all over Australia in agencies. And it was my husband that said to me, you know that this is a real job. This is like, you know, this is recruitment. And so I started Talent Run at the start of the year, and I haven't looked back. I think having a background running an industry body, but also being a suit for 15 years before that. So I started out in account service for George Pat's, now VML, and I worked in independent agencies and also network agencies, including Ogilvy in Auckland and Melbourne before that. So I think it's been an awesome transition and an easy one, and I love helping people get jobs.
Yeah, that sounds great. Finding what you really like a part of your job, and then making it into your own. Was that scary when you first started that up, or you had full confidence going into it?
I started on January 1st, and on day 3, so January the 3rd, special call to brief me on a whole lot of roles. So I felt like this is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got so many connections, right? What are some of the most effective networking strategies would you say are the most effective for you in the advertising industry?
I think if you're looking for a job, which I think your audience will be in the ad industry, I think it is about going out and meeting people in person. So it's about attending networking events. Like coming up will be the award Work Behind the Work, and that's a great one to go to because you get to experience what it's like behind the scenes for agencies. And so attending award events and also being part of the Young Bloods. The Young Bloods is a committee for under 30s, and I'd encourage everyone who wants to start their career in advertising to go there. They'll be running educational events, they'll be running social events. Last week they ran a great speed mentoring night, which I'm sure some of your audience would have gone to. And I think it's if you were a junior copywriter and you're looking for an art director partner, Youngbloods events, they're fantastic to go and meet a partner there.
How important? How important would you say it is to have a mentor when you're just starting out in creative industries?
I think having a mentor is great because they can often help you navigate pathways into the industry, and so I would encourage everyone to have a mentor. And even still, I've got mentors that help me both from an advertising career sense and also from a recruitment sense, just helping me, guide me, provide advice. And I think that we can always learn. I don't think we're ever there and settled.
And what do you think makes a mentor great? What are some of the most qualities that you think?
Yeah, look, I think they've got to be a good listener, but also you've got to be a good listener. And I think it's providing someone who you really admire. There's qualities in there that you think, I would like to be like them and follow them. And it might not be everything, but it's taking certain qualities and learning off them.
And let's say we attend a networking event.
Yes.
And some of us are quite shy. Like, do you have any ways that you can suggest us to make meaningful connections with people? Like, how do we approach people?
Yeah, and it is really hard. It is, especially talking to really senior leaders. You know, if you're in front of an agency MD, you know, you do get a bit of stage fright and you think, what am I going to talk about? What I suggest is going in with 3 stories in your head that you've pre-prepared. So have a think about it. It could be someone that you met on the tram. It could be a really great ad or a campaign. But it's having conversation starters that you can use if there's silence. You know, agency leaders are really great at making conversation. That's why they've got to the point where they've got. So I think it's about using that and kind of bouncing off them, but certainly having some, you know, pre-stories can help you and make them as fun as possible.
That's really good advice.
And also creating a bit of a story for yourself, because if you talk about a story, you're often remembered by that story, and so that if you face them in an interview stage later, you can remind them about that silly story that you mentioned about a camping trip where your tent got flooded and you lost all your clothes.
Well, thank you so much. So now, Julia, first of all, we want to congrats you on the recent ARIA Award nomination for Best Cover Art for Tones and I. Yeah, we absolutely love your work. It's very unique and very you. And can you share a bit about your journey? How did you get to where you are today?
I would have loved a mentor. I didn't have one. I sort of went in completely, completely blind to the world. I went to art school. And I then was exhibiting works for a year, and then my friend invited me to go to see her band, and I was like, what is this? Like, and she's like, it's a gig. I'm like, a gig? What's a gig? What is going on? And I didn't know that, like, I'd seen the Noisy Johnnies, John Diggleday's band, but I hadn't been to a gig in like it was in the Evelyn in Fitzroy, and I was just like, and everyone knew the words to my friend's band, and I was like, how does everyone know the words? And she's like, people love the songs, and I was just blown away. And then I started I was a photographer at art school, so I started using my camera, and then it was just about seeing what's helpful out there. And I think that's like a big thing when in the creative industries is just being helpful. And so I was just like, well, taking photos of bands is helpful for them. I didn't think it was ever going to become a job. And then just kept doing it, and then kept getting asked back, and then eventually was getting paid, and then it became a job, and then did a master's in advertising because I was really interested in building brand identity for emerging Australian indie musicians, because I really just believe in Australian music. And then, it just sort of kept snowballing, and then, here we are today.
Absolutely. When it comes to working with bands, and especially when you're just getting started out, when you first started working with bands, how did that work, having a creative vision that would line up? Just in terms of that collaboration, what was that like working together?
It's so different with each artist that you work with, because every artist has their own music, and really the collaboration is all about the music. So I think that it's been really fascinating, because when you go into the collaboration, you're both there because of the music. Like, I'm there to bring the music into a visual world, and they're there because they've made this incredible music, and I want to represent them and their music. So I have to, you get to know them. You really have to do your research on the music and do your research on them, and then you kind of bring it to life together. And does that answer that question? Is that
that does.
Your work is pretty visual. How do you make sure the artists that you collaborate with, their personality really shines through their work?
A lot of questions. I think that's the thing, and research. And I think, it's very. And also just checking in with them, I think it's sort of, and not having any ego or pride or thinking that you've got the vision. You never have the vision. It's their vision. You're trying to represent someone, you really have to go in without any preconceived ideas. You do your research, you listen, and you say, okay, for me this sparks this. What do you think? What is it? It's about the bouncing back and forth, and kind of lots of questions between, and checking in as you go, and even at every stage of the process. So you want to make sure that they're happy in the pre-production and they're fully happy with what you're about to do. Then you want to be happy on the day. You want to say, is this working? If it's not, let's shift, be open to shifting. And then in post-production, say, what are the changes here? And then eventually, you know, with all those little blocks along the way in communication, you end up being able to capture them and their vision fairly well.
Absolutely.
So you're kind of willing to change, adapt your style according to the artist you work with too?
Of course, yeah, because it's sort of, that's the joy of collaborating, is that you end up in a place that you didn't know was possible and they didn't know was possible. But if you want to do something that you've got in your mind, then you'll never end up being able to, you know, come to a new place, I guess.
And that's a question I want to ask the both of you. Does collaboration spark innovation? And can you think of an example where a collaboration actually led to something groundbreaking?
I can talk from an advertising point of view. I think we've seen campaigns come to life that are incredible. I think one example is the Clemenger Bebedio Maya Christmas Bauble campaign a couple of years ago, and that was a collaboration of a creative idea about creating a bauble that is a line to Santa to say if kids are naughty or nice, and it changes colours depending, and it's controlled by parents on an app. But there was a creative idea there, but you had to work with, you know, technology providers. It was a product on shelf with a price point and a barcode, so you had to work with, you know, the actual supply chain to get it onto that shelf and make sure that can work. There was a lot of advertising collateral that went out with it. So there's an ad campaign, and then, but the technology, if the technology doesn't work, then the whole idea falls over. So I think we're seeing more and more of that in the advertising space, and less so of just a TV commercial that's 30 seconds. And innovation is so critical to the work we do, and often the briefs coming into agencies are around product development, innovation, AI. So yeah, absolutely, collaboration's never been more important.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just thinking about a Christmas bauble with a naughty and nice. I'm like, that's so, I control the app, like, naughty.
And then it just goes red and it's
yeah, and
flashing.
it's like, you want to clean your room? Like, nice. Yeah, in terms of, I guess, it always, like, I think, you know, in your own mind when you're coming up with an idea, it's sort of like you link two ideas and that's the little creative spark. So I think when the more ideas that come into the room, the more sparks sort of alight and the more innovation you get. But I also think that only happens when you really let people shine in what they do, because I think that's the thing, you have to sort of let go of control a lot of the time and say, okay, well, what's your area of expertise? I need you to kind of shine, sort of thing. I think it's in music, I mean, it happens constantly, because between musicians and between artists and the visual artists, between the set designers. So for the Tones cover, for example, it was sort of like we wanted the room to look old, and I was like, oh, I'll do it in post-production. And the set designer was like, why don't I put rice flour all over the ground? I was like, because I've got to sweep it up. But I was like, you know what? Go for it. And it really made it work.
Yeah,
and like,
yeah,
you know,
it was-
it's sort of, you tie things together because people have different areas of knowledge that are exciting, and things always end up better when there are more brains in it, I reckon. And good
This
brains.
episode is all about, you know, being connected, and you've worked with artists like Tones and I, covers like Rolling Stone magazine and Spotify and all that. How has the recognition and visibility influenced your career and your professional connections?
I think in terms of the recognition, it's a funny thing because recognition, you know, it doesn't always, like, it's always surprising. You know, you go like, oh, you like that, did you? You know, like you never kind of know what will be recognized, and you something might fulfill you that's not recognized. But I think overall recognition helps in just building trust with people. And I think at the beginning what I noticed is I'd say, you know, we'd just go to the manager or the label and say, here's the project we're thinking of getting off the ground, and they'd be like, and how are you going to make that happen? And it's like, no, I swear I can. You know, I will make it happen. And there's sort of a lot of doubt there. But as with recognition, it builds trust. So you say, we're going to do this, and it's going to look like this. And they go, awesome. Like, let us know when it's done. You know, like there's no questioning, which I think is really, I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can both of you share like a story where a personal connection led to like a professional breakthrough? Is there like a...
Maybe I'll share a story about personal branding that I think is really important to getting a role. I don't know if it answers your question completely, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning to your audience, you know, graduating soon and looking to get a job, and that is creating a personal brand. And so all I wanted to do since I was young was to get into account service in an ad agency. And I got an internship at the agency Y&R, which is now called VML. And someone told me that, how are you going to then get a job from an internship? How are you going to make that connection? And so it was all about creating a personal brand that would be remembered when I go for that interview for a job. And so I decided that for the 2-week or 3-week internship, I'd wear a different coloured beret every day. And so I wore I'd wear, and it was crazy. I'd wear a red beret, then a purple beret, and I'd go off on the tram to work, and I'd do my internship, and I never took my beret off. And then a couple of years later, after I'd completed uni, I did my master's here at RMIT. I went back for a job interview, same agency, and no one remembered me. But when I mentioned the beret, it was always remembered. So I think it's about creating connections and creating, a brand for yourself that can be remembered. And it's back to those stories, having a story that can be remembered. So when you're going for those interviews, you can kind of draw back on that.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Or you need to be wearing, a different colour.
Yeah, I know. I need to dye my head day by day going in. That's great. Yeah, that really rings true.
He's always wearing the same stuff.
I do. I've got a
He
good.
needs to stitch it up.
Yeah, that's it. I've got a good collection of wigs at home. I'll be able to work through.
All right. So as you say, we often hear the industry insider says, it's really all about the connections in the industry. What advice would you give to young professionals and creatives on building and leveraging connections to advance their careers, besides the point that we discussed just now?
I think, if I was graduating this year and I was looking to get a job, as a first step, I'd really think about my personal brand and what job I want. I think it's great if you know what role you want, because if you're wanting to be in a creative department versus being account service, you're talking to completely different people within an agency. And it's not just a job in an ad agency. You need to, at this point, kind of go, what kind of role do I want? And there are directions and ways and pathways to get that role. And so I think that's probably a tip. And then you network with those people. So if you want to be a junior copywriter and that's what you want to do, doing award school is a great start. But also having a look at work, and agency work, and meeting ECDs that you like their work. So if you like the work of the Monkeys, well, make it your mission to go and meet some of the creatives who work at the Monkeys so you can get in there. So making those connections of people that you admire. Or if you really love, the work that TBWA does, well, and you want to be a suit, well, go in there and start meeting some suits who work at TBWA. And we're so fortunate now with LinkedIn that it's actually quite easy to work out who's working at what agencies and what roles they're in. So forging those connections through LinkedIn is a good start, and going to events where maybe these leaders are talking as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So final question for you guys. What do you think the industry is looking for right now? What would you say is in demand at the moment?
I would say people who are flexible and helpful and take responsibility for what they do, because I feel like in the creative world, at least, there's a lot of jobs, but they're very random. And you never know. And I think people who are just willing to get involved, just get involved. And I think it's interesting, like what you were saying in terms of meeting roles. I think in the creative industry, it's about just finding people who you like and who you want to spend time with and who you click with, and following and lifting each other up, and kind of just staying positive and getting excited and that kind of thing. But I think, just being positive and really finding where you can be helpful, you will get jobs. It's just kind of the way it is in the world that's a bit chaotic at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I think also to add to that is curiosity. I think we want to see people coming through that are curious, that want to ask questions as to why this is happening, or why that's happening, or why there's flour being put on the floor. What does that do? Those kind of questions are really great. And I think adding value wherever you can. So if you can help out, your line manager in any way, if that's, like getting coffee for clients, setting up a meeting room, taking notes, all of that stuff. Anything that's just extra and helpful, I just think is what agencies are looking for.
Yep. And I know a lot of people who've landed pretty incredible roles just by having been around and been really helpful. And then everyone's
Yeah.
like, we can't live without that person. They're so great. You know,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, already a part
Final
of the
question
team.
from me. So speaking of creativity, you know, Hungry Talk is all about staying curious and being creative. How do you stay inspired, you know, especially under tight deadlines? And how do you keep on, for the creativity, how do you stay inspired?
Do you
I
want to start?
definitely, yeah, sure. I think that's about the people around you. It's like when you find those people you click with, like I've worked from about, you know, 8 a.m. until 3 a.m. every day, probably for about 10 years more. And sometimes that's pretty exhausting and you get a bit burnt out. But then I hear like an incredible song and then meet somebody I'm really inspired by and, well, where did the burnout go? Like, so it's sort of like, I think staying inspired, I think it's very hard if you're not around people who really inspire you and make you excited about what you're doing in life and people who are supportive and, you know, and foster each other. And yeah, so I think that's, you can stay inspired if you believe in what you're doing, but you need to be with the right people.
Well, thank you so much, Amy and Julia. That was incredibly insightful.
Right, and before we move on to Off to the Market with James and Tim, let's take a quick break and check out some inspiration. Thank you so much, guys. That was
Hello, my name is Rory. I'm doing the graphic design for Hungry Talks. So any logos or little digital things you might see. Mostly I just spend my days drawing pictures of oranges. The Carlton Draft Big Ad was made in 2005, directed by Paul Middleditch, art direction by Grant Rutherford, who later went on to co-found East of Everything, and written by Ant Koff, who's now at the Monkeys in Melbourne, with cinematography by Andrew Lesney, who also DP'd on Lord of the Rings, which you can definitely see in the ad. I first saw this ad when I was just a child, and it opened my eyes to the idea that advertising could be more than just a marketing strategy, that it was a tool to move units and increase overheads, but rather that it could be creative and audacious and silly. The world needs more silly, basically. Ads like this, and definitely any creative work like this, teach us not to settle on first ideas or safe ideas, but to push and interrogate your ideas. And that while sometimes it may feel undervalued, really the best thing you can add to any team and any project is the uniqueness and creativity of your own voice. So for the next minute, sit back, crack open a cold one if you got it, and enjoy the ad.
Welcome to Off to the Market, where we take a break from providing the insight. This week I'm joined by special guest Dr. Tim Stroh. Tim is a lecturer here at RMIT and a researcher in the field of decision making with a focus on the adoption of new products. This is the topic of his 2018 book, A Deeper Truth. Today we're going to be discussing the paradoxes of buyer behavior and how you can harness the science of decision making to ensure success. So Tim, how difficult is it to launch a new product?
Very.
Very.
Extremely. Research would suggest that If you look at post-launch, so decision by a company to actually take a product to market, somewhere between 30 and 50% of new-to-market products fail in and around that area. If you go all the way back to concept, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of all new-to-market product development, innovation, research translation, startup, concept, moving forward, fail.
90% of
90%.
all new products.
Correct.
That's incredible.
Should differentiate new-to-market products
Yeah.
as opposed to incremental, right? So if you're Sony and you've made your TV, 2 centimeters bigger, I don't call that a new product.
Yeah, that's probably going to have a higher success rate. What are some of the biggest challenges in making a new product? Why do so many fail?
So of a variety of reasons. You can think about taking any new product or new-to-market product. As I say, if you're making a television slightly larger, you don't really have to establish awareness in the marketplace for what a television is or why something that's slightly bigger in screen would be beneficial. When you've got a completely new-to-market product or something that's highly innovative, your starting point is having to build awareness in the marketplace that the thing exists. And why anyone would want it. And there's going to be tremendous uncertainty about that. So not only do you have the cost of trying to build awareness for this thing, you have to overcome how decisions are made. And in all people, decisions where things are uncertain, they don't follow what normally are considered rational rules.
Right.
So a huge part of the challenge is just overcoming how decisions are made or how you play on that.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the difficulty of marketing new products. Do the same issues ever affect established products?
Oh, absolutely. This issue of decision making, anytime there's something uncertain that a person has to make a decision about, contrary to, I think, accepted understanding in the way people think, people think the way they do.
Yes.
Right? That generally is not the case. In fact, almost never. Not only that, people think that people make rational decisions, right? Most people make a decision on the assumption that others are going to make a rational decision. The reality is when things are uncertain, we have at a minimum of 16 really distinct decision-making modules in the brain. These modules all compete with each other when a decision is being made. When things are uncertain, these evolved modules play a much bigger role. So things like belonging and fear of ostracism, probably the biggest motivational force in human behavior and decision making. People will do anything not to be ostracized, right? And there are a variety of reasons for that. That area of the brain is actually linked to the same pain centers that have you sense and understand pain when you touch a hot stove, right? So fear of ostracism is just deeply rooted motivation.
A really strong motivator.
Huge.
Far greater than rational.
Far greater than reason, far greater than personal safety. It's definitely at the top of the stack.
Okay.
We also compete for relative status. That's one that is often overlooked, right? You can kind of think about each of these as forms of value, right? We don't just want economic utility. We want relative status to people in our peer group or our larger reference groups. We want to make sure we belong. We'll resist loss of belonging. We'll resist loss of relative status. There are things like autonomy and interestingness or novelty, right? Reality here is if you don't get a certain amount of novelty in your life, you will actually have negative health consequences.
Fascinating.
Right? You will get sick more. You will have more accidents. You will wind up in the hospital more if you don't have a certain amount of interestingness and novelty in your life. Same for autonomy. Relative capability is another one of these drives. So yes, we are capable of reason, but reason...
It doesn't motivate us. Or not as much as we might like to think.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right? We are capable of reason, but reason is most active in helping us pursue these other forms of value, not economic utility.
Okay.
Right?
I spoke to several advertising students here at RMIT to find out what they think, To find out if they think that consumers are rational, here's what they had to say.
I think they're motivated by their environment and what their needs and wants are. Depends on their age, their gender. I think their individual circumstances indicate the products that they need, and then, what we do to fit those needs.
I reckon consumers want to feel like they're important. I reckon if a product makes them feel like they're special, they'll buy it.
I think personally, when a product relates to how I'm feeling, thinking, or something I'm seeing, especially across social media, that's what makes me purchase more frequently. If I'm going into a shop and I see a piece of clothing that relates to how I identify and how I like to express myself, I'm more likely to purchase it.
What factors motivate consumers?
So from what I've learned about advertising, it really depends on what you're purchasing. So if you're buying big things like a car or a house, then research and rationale would be the thing that motivates you. But if you're doing things like an everyday grocery shop, then I would just say whatever's easiest motivates you. And that doesn't necessarily have to be rationale. It could just literally be the sake of convenience.
For any larger purchases, I'd say there's rational motivation there, a bit more forethought. Even stuff like supermarket shopping, obviously not going to buy expensive cleaning products when they're not on special, because what's the point?
Trends often motivate consumers, especially in social media and TikTok.
I agree. I think personally, I know that packaging and stuff isn't the most important factor, but it really does influence me on buying. If I go to Woolies, I'll get the body wash that looks pretty.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm a bit of a sucker for packaging as well. And also for, I am very influenced by social media influences as well. Even if it's subconsciously, I know that I'm always more likely to consume something that is very heavily on my For You page on TikTok and things like that.
How often do consumers make rational purchases?
Not often. I want to say not often, maybe once a month. I don't think people are buying houses and cars every day.
I think they don't make them very often at all. I think nowadays, because you're so easily influenced, that you're just buying anything from TikTok shop a few times a week at least. But yeah, that's without thinking about the current economy.
Yeah, I feel like everyone spends their money differently. So I would say most of my purchases are pretty irrational, but I don't know, some people like to spend their money on clothes, some people like to spend their money on cars, you know what I mean? I feel like most people's purchases are pretty irrational, not super needed.
I agree, actually. I do think there is a lot of irrational purchasing. I mean, especially when people's mental health is bad as well. It's a lot of I deserve this, life's hard, I'm going to buy this.
How often do consumers make rational purchases?
I don't know. I feel like no one buys something if they think it's irrational. But I think if a product feels sort of rare or in demand or scarce, they're going to be more likely to make a snap decision.
And those would be examples of non-rational motivators?
Yeah, or something that they probably couldn't justify retrospectively.
I don't really do irrational purchases. Living out of home so young definitely determines how much I purchase. And to me, an irrational purchase is something that I don't typically need. So clothing. I think majority of my purchases are rational. I can't think of the last time I purchased something that I didn't need.
For me, as an international student, I have the limited money, so I need to think a lot.
One factor that leads to irrational purchases from me is lack of patience. But I'd say kind of when it comes to other things, maybe it's a rainy day and you're caught out in the rain and you spend money on a jacket, things like that kind of can lead to more irrational purchases.
Perfect.
Now, Tim, you've just seen how students responded to questions about the rationality of consumers. Most of them spoke about rational purchasing as a binary concept, either rational or irrational. Is this a useful way to think about motivation?
I would absolutely encourage everyone not to think about it as a binary. Right? It's definitively not a binary. And a lot of the examples that were referenced are good cases in point. Any of the multitude of psychological mechanisms that were evolved to manifest will play a role in a decision whenever they're activated by that set of conditions. So if you've got a limited budget and you must buy a car and you can't afford something that's going to confer status upon you, right, your reason is going to weigh more heavily on that decision process. But if you've got ample funds, or you're part of the group that manifests that particular trait more extremely than others, and all of these are polygenic traits, they express on a bell curve. Some people have them a lot, some people have them a little, most of us, you know, on average. You're going to do everything in your power to get something that confers status on you. So you're going to buy a car, you're going to buy the car that you most think will confer status on you, least risk your ostracism. So it's not a binary at all, and reason in terms of these modules evolved very recently, right? You know, the reason belonging and ostracism is so core or fundamental to motivation. If you think, you know, most animals, if they're social animals and they get ostracized, they're not having very many kids and they're not surviving, right? So most animals have this. So it's not a binary, it's not your rational some of the time and not other times. It's if a set of conditions activates your drive for status, your fear of loss of ostracism, your identity, right? Your identity, if you think about relative status, relative capability, belonging, these are only accessible in comparison to others. So part of your identity is this need to define yourself relative to others. Okay, if that's triggered, you're going to resist challenges to your identity or your group identity well over, you know, reasoned utility or economic benefit, right? If you think about extreme sports, there's lots of this idea that people compete in extreme sports for the adrenaline, and I'm sure that does play a role. But I would put to you that the evidence supports the idea that really what they're doing is competing for relative status in a peer group and competing to belong in that peer group, right? They don't want to get ostracized from it. They don't want to lose relative status in that group. So they do more and more extreme things.
Right. Okay.
Right? I hope that made sense in terms of juxtaposition to being rational. It's not a binary, though. They're all intermingled.
Yeah, right. Many of the students said that their purchasing decisions were entirely rational. How well do we really know our own motivations as consumers?
We don't.
We don't.
One of the fascinating things for me in a lot of the research that has been done, that I've done, is really just how little people are aware of what governs their decisions. There's a great set of experiments where they ask a bunch of subjects to answer 20 questions. They then ask them to wait a moment, they go away, and then they come back and they change some of the answers that the subject gave. And they go back to the person and say, look, you answered this question about, you know, your political position on this subject. Why did you answer it that way? And in asking the question, they're giving a different answer than the person actually gave. And rather than the person correcting the experimenter, the person will give a rational answer. They will explain why they answered it, in fact, differently than they actually answered it, right? They'll do photographs of people and say, you know, which one do you find more attractive? They'll tabulate that. They'll go back and say, well, you said this one was more attractive, when in fact it was not the one. Why did you do that? And the person, will, without batting an eyelash, will go, oh, it's because of the mustache or the eyeglasses. We'll give some explanation. I raise all of that to say, well, like, we literally often explain why we make decisions after the fact, not in the lead up. So as a general rule, most people are not aware that, you know, why did they buy the Tesla? If you ask them, they will tell you, oh, it's the screen, it's fuel efficient, it's environmentally friendly. They'll give you a rational answer. The reality is it was just they want to flaunt their status and the fact that they can afford one.
So we do a lot of work to rationalize decisions that we already made or that we didn't make. that we've been told we made.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, so we really don't know ourselves at all. What would you say is the most undervalued insight about consumer behavior?
Look, I'm biased because, you know, my research is on how decisions get made when there's any degree of uncertainty and what's the role of evolved psychological mechanisms in decision making. I would put to you that is, you know, it's underutilized. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it, but that would be the thing that I would love for many, many more consumers to be aware of. Because contrary to this idea of bias, right, the economists would have you believe that your decision making is rational except when you're biased away from it. That's not true. There is no core rational decision process. It's actually on the periphery, right?
We're not fundamentally rational.
Absolutely not. We are capable of that, but we are not fundamentally that way.
Okay.
And we're not biased away from a rational decision. What we have is a motivation to belong, to pursue status, to have relative capability, to, you know, pursue and defend family, like we have these set of drives. We use reason to pursue those things. We're not biased away from those things or biased away from economic utility or safety. We're actually just pursuing other things.
Excellent. Thank you. And finally, to tie it back into the episode, Tim, you teach entrepreneurship here at the university and have ample experience in the field. How important have business connections been to your ventures?
I would say tremendously important with a wrinkle. I would say relationships are tremendously important. Getting to know people is tremendously important, not necessarily business connections.
Okay.
When I first arrived in Australia, I knew my wife. That was it. It took me a while to learn this, but the more you proactively listen, and listening to some of the earlier interviews, the more you just try and be helpful and try and be interested in other people, not networking in a mercenary way, just literally being interested in other people and trying to help them. The more relationships you build, the broader those relationships get, the more beneficial having those relationships is back to you. And I would encourage anyone who wants to start a business, really do anything, right? Go talk to people. Not to talk to them, but to listen.
Yes. Right. Beautiful. So get some friends, really. That's all we have time for this week on Off to the Market. Now it's back to our hosts.
Right? We covered so much today, from understanding the power of connections with Amy and Gigi to unraveling the complexities of consumer behaviour with Tim.
There was so much to learn, whether it's building connections, finding inspiration, or making smart decisions. So many valuable takeaways.
And for those of you who are about to graduate or just starting out, like me, we hope this episode gave you the confidence to take that big next step.
Relationships are powerful, both personally and professionally. Cherish them, nurture them, and never underestimate where they can lead you. And be kind to people.
Speaking of connections, what's the weirdest connection you have, Z?
Can't really think of one right now. Do you have one?
Oh, definitely. My auntie's hairdresser is friends with the founder of Dell.
What?
I know. Anyway, a big thank you to everyone tuning in. We hope you had as much fun as we did.
We hope to see you all next week. Until then,
Stay curious.